Hey everybody, Austin from Hinge here. I'm joined by Hinge's managing partner, Liz Harr. Liz, how are you doing today?
Hey, Austin. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. So last week we released the consulting edition of the high growth study, and I wanted to get you on to a quick call here just to go through just a few of the findings from the report. We know that the consulting edition is the largest industry report that we put out. We had over 300 consulting firms participate this year. So I wanted to get some of your thoughts today on what we found inside this exciting research project.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
All right. So we wrote a blog that kind of highlights some of the findings. And I think it's important to say just some because the amount of data that is included in the full report is like, it's a lot. But it's still nice to kind of go in and tease out like what are some of the themes that we saw. So in our blog post, Liz, we outlined six kind of primary findings. The first one was about artificial intelligence and automation leading the conversation. Liz, this year was the first year where, after many years of seeing uncertainty be the number one challenge in professional services, we saw that AI and automation actually took the top spot when consulting firms were asked, what is your top challenge? What do you make of that change from uncertainty and into this AI and automation being listed as the top challenge?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's not a surprise at all. I think that I actually look at this as a dimension or a subset of uncertainty because AI has been disruptive. It's been a force accelerant to higher levels of performance. It's been a lot of different things. I think what we're seeing here is just firms acknowledging that they can't afford to not take AI into account. It's going to impact in many ways, shapes, and forms how they go to market, how they operate, how they scale and accelerate, and how they do specific things like marketing itself. So I think this is a head nod to that, and firms that focus on this and prioritize figuring out how AI fits into their specific equation are going to uh, do themselves a favor.
I think you're right, Liz. And actually, I think that finding was seen clearly in the report as well. Not only did we ask companies, what was their top challenge, we asked them, what are the top topics you plan to learn about in 2025? And I think it's no surprise, artificial intelligence was at the top of the list again. And so I think as we, think about this and reflect about how the people taking the survey are marketers, they're business leaders, the fastest growing cohort, they're telling us that this is something that this year in 2025, they're really trying to get their arms around. Liz, the second finding that we had is that content creation is here to stay. So in terms of top marketing priorities, we give the people that take the survey a whole pool of answers that they could choose. But once again, business leaders and marketers chose content creation as their number one priority for 2025. What do you make of this finding and just the staying power of content creation as a top marketing priority for the high growth firms?
Well, I think this is why we see 4.5 times growth and profitable growth at that. This is what separates the fast growers from the no growth cohort. And in another finding, we found that a specific type of content, and that is original research, is fast becoming one of the marketing strategies or techniques, if you will, that deliver the most impact, highest return. And so I think this is interesting because, I mean, producing content in a way, there's no firm out there that's going to say, oh, we don't produce content. Everyone tries to do it. The high growth firms they've figured out how to produce authentic content that actually educates in a meaningful and differentiated way. I think the other firms that are producing content that feel like, gosh, I haven't received a lead from our content, it's not doing anything for us, I look at our metrics, it's not performing, There's a reason why. It's because it's content that simply adds to the noise. It's a super noisy marketplace, and that's only increasing. So what we're looking at here is firms are realizing that the outside world, the prospective clients, even existing clients, they are hungry for authentic thought leadership. And so that's what, when we say creating, or when we see creating content as a top priority, that's really what we're looking at here.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, connect that to the thought that you said that we were just talking about a minute ago with AI. To your point, there's so much content that's coming out right now, and AI is kind of facilitating an increased volume of content. So it is imperative for marketers to really take a step back and look at their content marketing strategy and ask those questions. How are we different? How are we being helpful? How are we providing value? It's, I think, probably one of the big challenges for marketers today. So another finding that I think this has been one of the staples of the high growth study for many years. This is the 10th edition of the high growth study. And in many of these years, we've seen this trend that the high growth consulting firms, they generate more digital leads compared to the their slower growing peers. I know that you followed this trend specifically as it's been in previous reports. How does that normally come about kind of in your client engagements and conversations with, the people that we're working with?
Well, so two things come to mind when I look at a stat like this. On the one hand, I still talk to a lot of firms out there who say, why would we invest in our website? We don't win and lose business because we have a great website. We don't get leads nobody downloads something and then says, hey, we want to give you a 6-figure contract. And I would say that's probably true. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a multitude of digital components. So we talked about content. Where does that content get disseminated? How often do people come across it? And yes, your website is important. It is your front door, if you will, to folks who have never met you before. So it does need to have a good volume of educational resources where your prospects can experience your expertise before they're going to give you the permission to kind of walk in the door or give a pitch or whatever. So that is important. And it is important to understand that your digital presence is making or breaking your pipeline. On the other hand, what I like about this is sometimes I talk with firms and they think it's all about digital, and that's not the case either. So there's a balance to be had across online and offline, digital and traditional techniques that port over to how many leads you're getting through those traditional means, referrals, repeat business from existing clients, and purely digital means. So I think what we're seeing here is high growth firms. Let's not forget the other component to high growth. It's profitable growth. And this is a big reason for that, because digital lead generation is a cost efficient way to build your pipeline. And that's what we see.
Exactly. All right. Well, there was a few other details that we saw from the research. This one is more specific, and I think this is where folks that either received the study because they participated, or those that are going to go and purchase the full report, this is the kind of example of, where you can get a lot of value out of this research. When we look at specific marketing techniques and different, like very specific things that the high growth firms are doing differently. Liz, one of the things that we saw in this year's study is that consulting firms, specifically high growth consulting firms, are really leveraging case stories as a part of their marketing and business development strategy. Now, not every industry that we studied, the case stories was not at the top of the list. This was a feature that for the consulting industry this year seemed to really resonate and really have an impact or be at the top of that list for the high growth firms. What do you make between consulting and kind of sharing and developing and sharing case stories as part of the strategy?
Well, I think the reason this works so well for consulting in particular is because consulting is this kind of abstract, non tangible thing that we're trying to sell. And so, uh, part of building your book of business is making the case through educational content. Okay, well, once you've captured somebody's attention, now what? Case stories are the thing that kind of make this abstract thing that you've written about more concrete and situational, if you will. So I think that's why firms are getting so much leverage out of it. And I'll say, I talk to a lot of firms who shy away from case stories because they think they have to put all the specifics in it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. That's just not true. In this day and age, privacy is a priority. And so it's kind of the norm that you don't name a specific firm, a specific person, specific role. That's okay. That is, you can still write how you did, what you did, and why you did, and what the result is. And that's really what people are looking for.
Liz, what would you tell a company that maybe they have, some case stories published on their website, but they're smaller, they haven't been updated in a while. Like, what do we normally advise our clients to do in terms of creating stories that work today and in today's kind of environment? How do we improve those?
Yeah, that's a great question because just because you have a case story from 6 or 7 years ago doesn't mean it's not relevant in today's market. But I would go back and take a look at some of those older ones. Let's say you still have the same general process for implementing whatever the case story was about. It's just the situation was different. You can update either the intro or conclusion with something that puts it in today's context, but still tell the story in the context of what you did 6 or 7 years ago. I talked with I was talking with a firm the other day, and they said, you know what, our best case story, we haven't written about it, but it's from something we did 8 years ago. And we haven't written about it because it was so long. And they told me the story, and I encouraged them to produce a case story around that. There's so much relevance to, if you think about what consulting firms sell, it doesn't change daily. It doesn't change monthly or quarterly. There's staying power to why you're here and how you deliver what you deliver. So the case stories, even though they might be older, still have relevance. I would just encourage you to eliminate stuff that looks like a timestamp and just add relevance in some of the commentary.
I love that. I think that's really excellent advice, Liz. So 2 more here. Finding number 5 that we wrote about is that high growth consulting firms outsource specialized marketing tasks. I'll say too, just similar to some other stats that we've shown here today, this is another one of those findings that we're not just capturing it here for 2025. This is one of those themes that for 5 years now, I think we've seen that the high growth firms, they leverage outsourcing specialized skills as a key part of the way they expand and scale up their marketing strategy. What have you made of this data and kind of the long trend here of high growth firms leveraging outside resources?
Yeah, if you were, for anyone who will be taking a look at the entire study, they're going to see the other half to this. So let me talk about that just for a second. What we see in this year's report is that high growth consulting firms are focusing their internal bench on skills that pertain to their specific expertise. So things like speaking and networking and doing consultations and demos, save that for the internal team. Meanwhile, take a look across what they're outsourcing. These are things that support experts who are out there speaking, publishing, and networking. So I think it's so smart. It's very expensive these days to build an entire bench around all the skills that are required to get leverage in today's marketplace. So why not outsource the specialized things that support what only you and only your experts can do?
I love that. I think that's spot on in terms of what we've seen in the data and how the different line items kind of fall into place. So that's great. Okay, so finally, and this might be my favorite, because it's just so interesting where we're at today with all the technology, all the tools that we have. When we asked marketers and business leaders to tell us how proficient do they think that they and their teams are in terms of measuring and utilizing marketing metrics, the answer was that they were not very confident. They don't consider themselves to be very proficient in terms of tracking and using marketing metrics. In the consulting edition specifically, this benchmark was actually lower than what we saw in our all professional services benchmark. So in our all professional services benchmark, we saw that maybe 11% of the total sample size said that they were highly proficient. When we look specifically at the consulting companies, that number shrank by almost half. And really, there was not a distinction between the high and the low growth in terms of that high proficiency. The difference was when we asked, are you low or somewhat, the high growth firms did have an advantage. So there seems to be a small advantage here that high growth firms have in terms of being more proficient and more confident in how they track and use metrics. Yet the whole industry at large, Liz, seems to really struggle with this as part of their program. And I think if you ask anybody coming out of university with a marketing degree, everyone will say like, yeah, tracking your results is like the most important part of marketing. But then here we are, as real practitioners, it's super challenging. Liz, what do you think about and make of this finding from this year's study?
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing here is, if you look at it at face value, it's just an overall acknowledgement and kind of being honest that this is very difficult. And there's with a multitude of things that you can measure, firms are saying, what do we measure? How often? What tools do we use? So that's part of what we see. But the other part is, and again, this is something we see in the full report, is how mature the use of tracking tools and technology is. And in the high growth, that's something that separates the high growth from the low growth. The high growth firms are much more mature in their digital tech stack, where automation is housed and where tracking and measuring is housed. So that to me is the real difference here, is that the low growth firms are saying, hey, we have never really done this and we're still not doing it. Therefore, we're uncomfortable with it. Whereas the high growth firms are saying, we've been doing this for a while. We know that there's so much more to explore, and we're not even tapping into we're not even on the cusp of it. So that's really the difference here. It's not that high growth firms aren't tracking. It's that they have been doing it. The landscape is changing. What we tracked 5 years ago is different from what we would track today. So I think the firms are being honest, and that's what we see them grappling with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Liz, thank you so much for speaking with me. The consulting report is now available. If you want to get your hands on the full report, you can. We'll post the link to this blog post that has the link where you can purchase the full report. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on these findings, and what's unique in your role as a consulting marketer. Is this do you resonate with these challenges? Do these findings correlate with your experience? We're excited for thoughts, questions, comments, and again, Liz, thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
I enjoyed it, Austin. Thank you.
Thank you.